I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technologies and trends in mobility, featuring the leaders and innovators who make it all happen. A few weeks ago, I had the honor and privilege of moderating a panel at SAE WCX in Detroit, where we had a great conversation with KPMG's Hugh and Waymo's Gerdes about vehicle automation and the growing scale of both Robotaxis and personally owned autonomous vehicles. As Level 4 takes shape in real-world deployments, those paths are starting to split in a big way. It's not just the technology, it's the regulatory environment and the depots. We unpacked why that divide is growing and what it means going forward. In case you missed it and you were not at WCX, here's a recording of that conversation. Enjoy. For the folks that don't know, today's a big day for Waymo. You started autonomous testing in London on the opposite side of the road, I might add. What goes in from manual driving to testing autonomous to eventually pulling driver out? What goes into that from a safety perspective?
Yeah, so it is very systematic as we move into a new geo. First of all, we map and we take data. So we'll have the cars out there, but they're manually driven in order to just get scans of the roadway. Obviously, something we've been doing in London up to this point. And then that's actually used. We'll test a lot in simulation. We'll make sure that we feel confident with putting the vehicles out on the road, and then we'll do it once again in the hands of the safety drivers. And so that's a process that we go through to make sure that everything is proceeding the way our simulations suggest, that the data is coming back the way that we would anticipate. And then again, when we're convinced that we've achieved the appropriate level of safety, then we're able to actually pull out the autonomous specialists and send the vehicles out there into the world with no driver.
Yeah, and then Hugh, so as Chris and the team at Waymo build the world's best driver, we look at their safety stats, 92% reduction in serious fatalities. There's an ecosystem that enables them to do that. Can you talk about that ecosystem, please?
Certainly. I think up to this point in the conversation, Chris, talking about all of the checks, the rigor that goes into creating a safe and reliable product, putting that product in the hands of, or rather putting that product out to create the experiences that are consistent for the end customer will often involve working alongside partners who are skilled in some of the aspects of getting passengers in clean, safe, charged AVs that Waymo itself has developed competency around, but also as many players in the ecosystem are increasingly partnering with other operators, other companies in the ecosystem to be able to deliver. I think, when we read the staggering statistics about the relative safety of Waymo's incident rate relative to normal driving, just to oversimplify it, right? I think it's important to note that a lot of those miles and rides have been delivered and provided in markets where Waymo is responsible soup to nuts for the vehicle and also the actual app experience and the hailing, all of those aspects of it. There is a growing pool or population of those rides that are actually being handled and delivered by some of Waymo's trusted and chosen partners. So it's through the partnership ecosystem and the collaboration among partners that you'll start to see the next dimension of scaling. That's how I'd like to answer that question.
So you raised the issue around consistency. So if I go for a ride in San Francisco, or I go in Dallas, or I go to Miami, it's a consistent experience. It's a great experience. My Spotify syncs. I know it's not a safety element, but it's a great user experience. And the vehicles are clean. How do you ensure, here, I'll get this one to you, from a partner perspective, that it meets, I'll call it the Waymo standard? Like, how do you ensure that for every market, that the vehicle, no matter what market I'm in, it meets the Waymo standard?
So maybe just speaking in terms that I know a lot of our OE and supplier audience attendees probably relate to. I think, on top of all of the rigor that goes into the product, and I won't speak directly for Waymo because Chris is here on stage, but there's a large body of SOPs, procedures, right? That, all proprietary, all very important, that are effectively instructions for how best to operate within the ecosystem, how best to kind of collaborate and partner, with Waymo. And I think the challenge for any Robotaxi, any L4 provider, right, to be able to scale is how do you take your baby, the keys to the kingdom, right? And the secret sauce, but make it so that someone else who's handling it on your behalf actually does so with the care, attention, and focus to detail and the experience that you would yourself if you're not necessarily directly in control of it. I mean, the implications are broad. It's not just about a consistency of experience. It's not just about making sure that the vehicle is very cleanly and then someone's takeout is not still in seat, whether you're in Dallas or Atlanta or Miami or San Francisco, but also ensuring that should there be an issue or an incident, the chain of custody of the vehicle, the chain of contact, where an incident response or a response to a regulator or an authority might be required, is also done consistently across the board in every city that you happen to be in. And if that involves more than just you have to be very prescriptive about how you do that.
Chris, are there safety guidelines? So the Waymo comes in the depot to get charged and get cleaned. Are there safety guidelines that go into, okay, let's look at the tire treads. Let's make sure the sensors. Are there safety guidelines that the partners follow?
Absolutely. I think as the company grows and scales, it's very important that all of these safety processes become fixed, become established. So we have on-call rotations at Waymo. I serve on the safety on-call rotation. And so there is a senior person who's available on-call 24/7 in a variety of different areas. Now, you can imagine early in Waymo's history, I think the on-call people were having to come up with a lot of policies on the spot, but there's no way that can scale, right? So essentially, you want to make sure that people at the depots, people who are working with our partners, people who are in contact with the vehicles, really have very clear procedures that they can follow. And as Hugh mentioned, that would be in case we do have a collision, just also to make sure that we're doing regular inspections, to make sure that the vehicles are going out in good service. We're able to catch any potential issues with hardware before they might actually manifest out on the road. So these are very important processes that we follow, and we try to make them very systematic so that we ease the burden on the on-callers. But we've always got that backup. So if something falls outside the ordinary, if we discover something that is not in our standard procedures, there's always senior people that are no more than a page away.
And then, since let's use the term, you're always available. There's a Waymo individual always available. Does that individual then, depending on the severity, hop on a plane to go do field work and do a field inspection of the incident?
Well, most of the time, the response that we have is virtual. So in the moment, we're trying to make sure that the teams on the ground have the support that they need. And so, I don't know that there's been a case of us in general having to go. There was one investigation with the National Transportation Safety Board where I did fly out to do this in person. But in general, the teams that are working with the vehicles, either Waymo personnel or our partners, are handling those responsibilities on the ground. And if we need to do a vehicle inspection for some reason, we'll absolutely go do that.
I mean, your data that you publicly published, around 92% of serious crashes from a human. Obviously, the roads are, I'll use the term, interesting places, to say the least. They're highly, highly dangerous. Have you started to notice any patterns of incidents? Is it getting rear-ended? Have you started to notice any interesting patterns in the data as you deploy? I believe you're at 500,000 miles a week now.
500,000 trips a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yes, actually, and if people are interested, we try to be as transparent about this data as possible. So you can go to waymo.com/safety, and you can see all of the statistics that I'm about to share with you and many more there. So there are some really, really fascinating patterns that we see there. As you mentioned, Grayson, what we show consistently is a 92% reduction in crashes leading to serious injuries or fatalities. So that class of crashes relative to a human driver, we reduced by 92%. And in order to make that comparison, what's very important is that you look at where those miles are being driven. So if you look at San Francisco, for instance, the rate of crashes like that is about not quite 4.5 times the rate in Phoenix, where we also operate. 4.3, I think, is about the number. So you can imagine a vehicle that would look very good, for instance, relative to San Francisco, but not look so good relative to Phoenix. So we compare our miles and we actually publish those benchmarks if people want to actually compare our statistics on the site. And one of the things that we're able to do as we have more miles, at this point, there's 170 million miles that are reflected in the safety data, is to start to look at different crash modalities. And so one of the big things that stands out is intersection vehicle-to-vehicle collisions. So you can imagine approaching an intersection and maybe you have a red light runner that goes through. And so Waymo, in terms of injury crashes, shows a 96% reduction in vehicle-to-vehicle intersection crashes. So there's a significant source of this. And you'll contrast that with something like front-to-rear collisions, where there's about a 44% reduction. And sounds like a dramatic difference, but it's actually pretty clear if you think about it. If you are stopped in a row of traffic at a traffic light and somebody rear ends you, there's really not a lot that you can do, even with the world's most trusted driver, to get out of that situation. And so that's a lot of the collisions that I review when I'm on call. Is here's another one. You have the Waymo perfectly stopped in a line of traffic and somebody just rear ends it.
But Chris, that you can answer the question with such precision. And I think Waymo is noted for its transparency in data disclosed and shared, not just in an aggregate level, but even at an incident-specific level. I think what that speaks to be able to even answer the question, right, of what does the data suggest, implies the significant investment in infrastructure and data capture capability that I think the company has. And as in my role at KPMG, we're often advising autonomy companies, OE suppliers, but also financial services companies. I'm getting asked a lot of those same questions regarding the ability of these organizations to capture relevant operational data. Automotive data as a business, by sizing, it could be a $23 billion business this year. It could evolve to a $100 billion business in the future. The notion that all of this operational information is actually being captured in a way that's publicly disclosable means that those that actually have that infrastructure to capture that can take advantage of that being a business a little later on. So just something I wanted to bring up, that your reaction on the data, what it tells you, implies for the industry.
That's a really good point. And I think this is something that Waymo has emphasized for a while. As actually we heard earlier from Peter Simshauser about NHTSA and the standing general order that they have revised. We have to report crashes through the standing general order. And Waymo makes the point of not redacting the motion of the vehicle. So every event that we report, every crash that we report to NHTSA, if you pull it down from the NHTSA website, you will see an unredacted version of what vehicle moved where, what the collision was, which part of which vehicle collided with which part of another vehicle, what the traffic situation was. So you can really read that narrative. We don't think that the motion of the vehicles is confidential business information. And so that's shared. So you can actually see the crashes there. And then you can actually see those reflected in our crash statistics published on the website, together with the appropriate human benchmarks in the places in which we operate. And our safety research team has done a lot of work to make sure that the methodology there is published. You can find the papers on the website, and peer-reviewed. And we're hoping, Hugh, as you pointed out, to make these standards so that as the industry expands, as more people are out there reporting this data, building the sort of infrastructure to be able to report this data, that we're also doing it in a standard way so that there's transparency and we do a good job to inform the public of the actual safety improvements of the technology.
If you go back to the Google self-driving car project, there's always been a history of transparency. Does that stem from Larry and Sergey, or where does that come from? Because you, in my opinion, are the most transparent AV company on the road today. Your data speaks volumes. Your unredactedness speaks a lot of volumes as well.
I have to say, I'm not sure exactly where the origin is, but it's very deep in the company culture. And so, I honestly was somewhat hesitant, having spent my career in academia, but also working in government with the Department of Transportation for a while, working as a safety advisor with Ford. I really valued sort of the openness which I had been able to approach all of these topics. And so it's been really nice to go to Waymo and see that there is this culture of transparency. When there's not a question, when we get asked a question from NHTSA, are we going to give them the answer to that? Of course we are. And so working with regulators, working with investigators like the National Transportation Safety Board, it's very easy. We communicate openly with them. It is kind of funny that there's not always that belief that we're going to do that. Obviously, regulators at different levels talk to each other, and occasionally they'll come back to us and say, "Hey, you gave us one answer, and you gave this other organization another answer," and we'll say yes, and you actually ask different questions. When you get to the level of detail that a lot of these things are asked, sometimes very similar sounding questions are actually quite different answers.
To Kedra, the co-CEO of Waymo, very publicly at a TechCrunch event said society is ready to accept a robotaxi death. Talk about that.
Yeah, so that was a very broad and open-ended question, sort of without context, that Kedra was asked at this conference. And in the background is what we've been talking about: this 92% reduction in crashes involving a serious injury or worse. And if you look at really the history of how safety innovations have gotten to the road, it's reasonable to expect that automated vehicles, in terms of public acceptance, will play out very similarly. And I'd like to use the example of airbags. So airbags are clearly a life-saving technology. NHTSA's latest estimate is over 50,000 lives saved over a 30-year period from airbags. Airbags began to roll out in greater quantities in the 1990s before becoming required in 1997. And in 1997, NHTSA actually estimated that 842 lives were saved for airbags. So this was early in their deployment, 842 lives saved. But there were 53 fatalities related to airbags. So the life savings came at a price. And if you look at what society and regulators did in that case, they didn't demand that airbags be pulled out of vehicles. In fact, they accepted that this technology was not perfect. Yeah. Now, they didn't accept the status quo, but pushed for continuous improvement. And that's how we got the airbag systems that we know today that will sense a lighter occupant. It's how we got the processes and the rules for putting children in rear-facing car seats, putting them into the back seats. So society did ask for improvements, but they accepted that this was not perfect. We would expect, given the safety improvements with automated driving that you see with the Waymo driver, that we'd get a similar reaction from society. Now, we haven't seen anything like the downside that we saw with airbags in Waymo miles on the road. In fact, we've seen that 92% reduction very, very consistently. But I think the other example that's interesting from airbags is that when I say airbags now, people may think of Takata airbags and the recall, and airbag recalls are in the news again. And I think this says that while regulators and society might accept that life-saving technology is not perfect, they're going to hold manufacturers to very high standards of performance and transparency. And that's going to be extremely important in the AV industry.
Yeah, just on that point regarding Takata, regarding the mass air recalls, and regarding how it didn't become an existential issue about the effectiveness of airbags. But I do recall the market response and my own personal involvement working with key safety systems and Takata, just how much scrutiny there became, right? All of a sudden, you were kind of the punching bag for any regulator or creditor-specific question about the viability of the technology and what you were going to do differently. So while I agree with you, Chris, that ideally AV gets to the point where the macro benefit of it is clearly undisputed, I think the lesson from that analogy is also for those who trip the micro issue, that the scrutiny of the world and of the industry will be on you, which is why such a gradual, safe scaling approach is critical to growth and not destroying that public trust.
You raise a really good point here, Hugh, and this is one of the challenges with deploying this technology. So if you look at the improvement, the reduction in severe injury and worse crashes, that would translate at this point, or at least with the 170 million mile statistics, to 35 crashes that did not occur. In other words, at least 35 serious injuries that did not occur. Francesca Favaro, who's our head of safety best practices at Waymo, actually had a very thoughtful LinkedIn post sharing the impact of collisions like that in her life and her family's life. And these are life-changing injuries many times. These serious injuries may create pain that someone really never recovers from. It can create painkiller addictions that stem from that. These can be really life-changing events. And 35 of those, statistically speaking, have not happened. That's a rate of about 1 every 8 days. Now, we can't find those people, right? Because they may not even be aware that anything was happening. They know that their Waymo suddenly hit the brakes hard, but may not know that that was actually an intersection collision that could have led to one of those things. And so it becomes hard because the things that are visible out in the world are very real. And if a collision happens, it's very natural for regulators to look at that and say, okay, well, this wasn't so bad, but what if? Maybe this could have been worse. And yet the vast number of collisions that are avoided or reduced in severity are kind of an abstract statistic.
You think about the positive impact that it has on that family unit and then society. It's immeasurable. Hugh, Waymo's holding to the highest degree of safety. They're using partners. How do you ensure those partners are held to that same level of safety and integrity that Waymo holds itself to?
Yeah, before I dive too deep off the deep end answering that specific question, I think it's really important to recognize that L4 players partner with different capabilities for different reasons. When we think about the autonomous vehicle ecosystem, Grayson, I know you share this point of view, so I'm okay repeating it out to this team.
Thank you.
But there's a couple of models emerging. You have the very kind of product-centric, I want to say, model where there's a lot of rigor, care, R&D in developing the product and the process around it. And you're leveraging partners in that model to scale the existing product that you control. Waymo is an example, I think, of where Waymo controls the product, and it's leveraging partners who have competencies in other aspects of the ride experience to scale that product. And then you have the separate camp where the partnership is the product, the aggregator model. I think Uber is probably the best known and most active publicly, in particular over the past 6 months, with the rapidity and the frequency and the size of the investments they're making, not just in vehicle OEs, but creating who are going to be investing in creating the platforms, but in the software providers and in fleet operators, and even in charging infrastructure. So those are the two camps of where partners are being formed. And if you're the former, it comes down to being very crystal clear about what your partner is doing for you and what they're not doing for you, and having rigorous control from a safety perspective and an operations perspective governing that partnership. I have a deal background. I worked in M&A most of my career, and a partnership is different than like a joint venture or an outright acquisition in the sense that there's a finality to an M&A event. As for a partnership, it really comes down to how you define it and what teeth you define in your agreement there. But it's tough because in a partnership, you're actually supposed to share mutually. And I think that when I look at partnerships, within Waymo, there's sort of a presumption that there's a mutual sharing because you're controlling one company's product. You're putting that in the hands of someone else and having them express and represent that experience elsewhere. As for the aggregator model and how you might get the most out of partnerships in a model where so many different individuals own a different piece of the stack or the ecosystem, I think that's a much bigger challenge. Because in the first, you can have someone like an auditor do that for you. You can have an auditor at an arm's length apply your standard for you. When everyone's roles are so fragmented, it becomes a lot more difficult to know and to hold partners accountable for what they've committed to you.
So let me ask you the $1 million question that was in the news today. How many partners is too many partners?
If I think about the aggregator model, which we're starting to see, some success with, in the sense that there are deployments being announced globally, working, in that aggregator model with partners. I think it's clear, just like it was in the early days of EV, right? Where the technology was there, but the infrastructure wasn't necessarily. So the infrastructure had to catch up. There are going to be investments that succeed with scale, and there are going to be those that don't demonstrate immediate success right away, winners or losers. It becomes really important to check and measure who is starting to lose through a series of rigid KPI that you define per investment, and then be able to redirect that investment as quickly as you can. in order to make the most out of it. Otherwise, the more losers you create by not providing that focus or attention reduces the number that you're trying to get to by n-1. So I think there's that strategy of aggregation, and it's not just one particular aggregator. There's multiple playing in that model, having to cast bets across a wide spectrum of, again, vehicle OEs and manufacturers, or maybe co-man in the future, software providers, fleet operations, network demand aggregation. It can be a really tough question to answer. I think we will know more when we actually start to see, I would say, other L4 providers outside of Waymo actually start to achieve scale in the markets that they've designated and try to deploy in.
But how do you manage that? So you have a OEM partner, you have an autonomous driving partner, you have a fleet management partner, and then we have the layer that nobody likes to talk about, the insurance layer.
Sure.
I'll put the term. You have a lot of cooks in the kitchen there.
I would add another layer to that I think is going to emerge, which is the financing partner, right? Which will get to the inevitable question that we'll probably get concerning, ownership of vehicle. But yeah, in that ecosystem of partners, it can be pretty difficult to manage performance across one common denominator, at least in the aggregator model, that even in the model that we're talking about, the ultimate backer will tend to be the same, generally funding the aggregator, who's then disseminating the investment across a number of different players. I think that some of the investment talent and the tech partnership talent at these aggregators is some of the best that I've seen, coming from venture capital and technology and banking backgrounds, where they're constantly having to pick, assess, and measure the performance of a myriad set of bets very quickly, simultaneously, as they measure the performance of their portfolio. So in that layer, if you're the aggregator, it's incumbent on you to define the specific rules and what you're expecting from each and enforcing that. The challenge is, if you're partnering with a lot, you don't really have the muscle or have the attention to be able to apply that consistently. So it's up to those investments to either live or die.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I'll use the nice word, challenges in that model. Chris, we're going to go across the world and go to Japan, where you're publicly testing in Japan. The blog post said that you're getting ready for commercial operation. I'm not going to ask you for a date to say the blog post says that you're preparing for it, but due to the Japanese regulatory environment, you have to work with a Japanese taxi company per Japanese regulations. What is that like from getting the vehicle ready from a safety perspective of working with that partner that you have to work with?
Yes, I don't have a lot of direct contact with that. I will say, just to hit on some of Hugh's points, I mean, what you say about needing to understand what you want the partner to do and what your responsibilities are extremely important in all of our partnerships. And I think also trying to make sure there is a very strong culture of safety and a very strong sense of mission at Waymo. So advance safely is one of our core values as a company. And I like that, because the company is scaling very quickly, but the company is scaling as quickly as it can safely. And these are very important things to make sure that we're aligned on with partners. So this is a developing process to understand better the Japanese society, better understand our partners in Japan, and who will be the most effective partners for Waymo there, how we communicate with regulators, because that's an important part of what our team does. And so we're actually hiring a field safety position in Japan specifically right now. So if there's any bilingual safety experts who would like to talk about Waymo opportunities in Japan, please see me at the reception.
Well, while we're on the topic of Japan, Chris, what I noticed from a pretty recent trip there, went there to visit Super Nintendo World. It's a separate story.
Hey.
But when my wife and I were getting into our ride share, our cab, it was a Nihon Kotsu provided cab hailed through Go, the ride-hailing platform. And there were a lot of experiences that we had in that cab ride that sort of suggested to me that an L4 rollout might actually be very good and do well, despite, I think, the reputation and the population density maybe impacting how the cars might move around. I think the driver, white-gloved, right, very consistent in the driving experience, very focused on the road, registered the trip at a stoplight on a paper log, took down notes and details and did that somewhat religiously. So there's a bit of there's a regimented experience with the ride practice and culture and acceptance that I experienced personally that I actually think, would see like robotaxi deployment like received very well. I imagine that there's also a litany of regulation and cultural norm that has to be addressed very proactively and not forced, that also needs to be addressed before a rollout. But that's what I saw there, and was really encouraged to know that, last April, Waymo had announced the desire to operate in 8 of 24 wards in Tokyo.
You bring up a valid point around cultural norms as Waymo expands globally. So look at your two global markets, London and Tokyo, and versus America, different cultures, different driving habits. How do you adapt the Waymo driver for those different driving habits that are part of the culture of those countries where you're expanding?
That's a good question. So we are developing really a single driver. So the idea is all of these experiences in different geographic areas are helping the Waymo driver become better. We don't design a specific driver for each one of our geos. Now, obviously, there's some things that you need to know about local laws. We didn't just take the vehicles to London and Tokyo and say, hey, I wonder how long it'll take the AI to figure out that they drive on the other side of the road here.
You'd end up in the Tower of London if you did that.
Yeah, Chevy Chase, European vacation. Yep. So we do actually have to have certain things that are specific to geos. You see this in the US as well, some variation in traffic rules. But the idea is that we're training the same set of software modules with this larger set of experiences. And so the idea is if you are a skilled and excellent driver in San Francisco and can also be in London and in Tokyo, that this really can be an additive process.
This is good. I'm going to throw them for a loop, and we're going to start integrating some questions here because the questions are great.
Awesome.
They're good, so I'm throwing them in as we go.
Okay.
Okay, Chris, this is for you, and I'm going to keep mixing them as we go. This is a great question. What considerations are used to evaluate a city or municipality for deployment?
Good. There's a lot of things. This has ceased to be a science project at Waymo. Obviously, we are really focused on commercial operations, and so there's a lot of aspects of the ride-hailing market that are important when we consider where we're going to go. So that is a process that our business teams make, and then of course, we look at the geographic area, the market, and how that matches our current capabilities, which, as we expand the capabilities of Waymo driver is becoming less of a factor.
So, but I'm curious, Chris, that I think that's a great answer because it sort of signals that scaling and maturation, as opposed to making sure the base tech works safely, is now the primary driver and concern. But does that sort of the corollary to that, or that sort of implies that from a base operation and safety perspective, maybe that and the ability of the vehicle to operate in a particular infrastructure or ODD is maybe less of a concern now, given how far you are. Is that the right way to put it?
Didn't exactly say that, but won't deny that could perhaps be inferred from what I said.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Yeah, we're finding the Waymo driver is readily deployable in different geos.
Yeah. I might layer on to the answer because I do think just double clicking into the commercial appeal or viability of a particular city or would be ODD. I think there are also a couple of operational aspects that make a lot of sense for anyone looking to deploy there. Right now, maybe outside of May Mobility, there's pretty much a near 100% correlation between AV platform and EV, right? Meaning that for the most part, again, with the exception of a couple of known providers, if you're going to deploy AVs in a market, you need charging infrastructure to be able to support that market. And with that charging infrastructure comes parking infrastructure that you need. It also can't be super far away from where you're trying to serve, but not so close and so dense that it's not really accessible or tenable. It's got to, serve those economics really well. So I think the access to infrastructure, in particular power, which is not always going to be in your control, as well as space and direct access, are also operational considerations for deciding where to deploy is best. And I think that's why and it wouldn't just be Waymo, but when you're considering where deployments are taking place or where they've been announced, whether here in the US, whether in Europe, in London, in the UK, or in Asia, I think those are all dimensions that have to be taken into account.
Hugh brings up a great point. Not to single Waymo out, but I was in Dallas a few weeks ago and I went to two of their depots, and they're opposite ends of the city. So Hugh, when you're planning, so let's use Nashville, Waymo, for example, it's a 60 square mile ODD. How do you envision depots in that? Do you envision them at the corners, in the middle? Do you base it off of traffic patterns? Do you base it off of energy availability? What goes into planning? Because to me, from a consumer, I'm looking at, okay, I don't want to wait 20 minutes. And then I'm assuming from Waymo's perspective, you want uptime.
Yeah.
And so how do you balance all of those when you're looking to build out a depot plan or a depot schematic in a new market?
I'm sure there's an algorithm behind the scenes that is helping to whittle down or narrow down, where in a particular municipality you might want to put depot infrastructure. I also think there's a data source in the actual, in the case of Nashville, right? If there's a partner that's been announced, getting their input too is going to be key. I also think one gating factor is the actual availability of leases. Many of these locations are often not necessarily controlled by someone private, right? So I think that's also a gating factor that plays into how you decide where to lease and then build a depot. And it's not just lease, it's generally building out the infrastructure and the facility required to meet your standard of servicing your vehicle at peak demand, not at a low demand, but at peak demand that you're sizing, for the future. It's a really tough question to answer, Grayson, because so many of those factors could weigh equally. But I think one thing that goes underappreciated, particularly when you're relying on a partner to help with the scale of your operations, what that partner has access to, where they have access to, and what their facilities are, I think is also a really important piece of the puzzle. If you had told me, I don't know, 3 years ago, as early as 3 years ago, that you would have rental car companies looking at different commercial streams and thinking of vehicle autonomy as one potential stream, I would have told you that's kind of far-fetched. But the reality is, right? I mean, it's an announced, there are announced partners that are rental car companies that are now working with autonomy companies very specifically on a product related to that. So, getting your partner input and seeing what they're good at and what they're capable of is also really, really important, because a rental car company brings to the table existing infrastructure, existing know-how on turnaround, and also it's not just existing infrastructure, but existing infrastructure built around and pointing to, like in the case of airports, pointing to the Hertz lot, pointing to the Avis budget lot. That's what they bring, and they're an important factor, I think, as well.
Chris, let's go back to Chris and I met when he was running the Center for Automotive Research at Cars at Stanford. And one of the most interesting things, sir, when you were running Cars was you brought together the most interesting group of people. I remember with the rental car companies were there. Then we had Bridgestone Tire was there. Then we had a company that made a silicone to go on top of something. But it was all these companies and individuals were coming together to figure out, okay, how do we solve autonomy? That was when we still had safety drivers. That ecosystems evolved. What brought all of those companies together in the early days? Say, okay, we're interested in this, and let's try and figure it out collectively.
It was a really interesting process because, obviously we were doing research there. And so the very first affiliates were companies that sponsored our research. And then as we started to do this and brought in more affiliates, actually a lot of the companies began to be more interested by who some of the other affiliates were. And so you were among them. So Grayson, as you brought in the city of Beverly Hills, other affiliates were like, oh, cities. That's interesting. I want to talk to this guy. And so, just as you're saying, it was really fascinating to have all of these people there. They were saying the same thing about you. And I think what we found was that there was just a point in time where a lot of companies could see this going in a direction, but it wasn't quite clear what it was going to do. We had a number of insurance companies, for instance, to think, what is the role of insurance in automated vehicles? I was invited at that time to talk to a group of people at State Farm. They had a very large meeting, and one of their agents asked a question on the panel. It's like, are we going to have one agent writing the policy, and who gets that who gets that client? I think these were really interesting questions. And I think the nice thing was, being a university, we were really kind of a neutral ground, and people felt comfortable coming to kind of learn what we had done, but increasingly to share what their questions and thoughts were. And so it became a really interesting group of people. And then that allowed us to bring in really interesting speakers like Mark Rosekind when he was administrator of NHTSA, and spark a variety of conversations. So yeah, it was a pretty special time, and I think the right place for that.
It was a special time because we had these early conversations, and the insurance issue, for the most part, has been solved. And then there's the questions that we would, over these wonderful lunches that you would host there, around business models, which brings me, Hugh, to a question from the audience. We got another one here. This is for you. How do you compare Waymo's integrated Robotaxi model with a future Uber-style platform using privately owned AVs such as Tesla's? Which model is more scalable and defensible long term?
Well, I think if I recall statements, Uber press release statements as of recent, while the long-term vision, I think by 2029, is to become the global demand aggregator for autonomous rides, the path there is a hybrid model. The path there is a model where on one platform you can have preference and summon a more conventional rideshare experience, and there's a litany of products in there. Or you can have one of a number of autonomous experiences, perhaps even one of a number of autonomous providers in the same ODD using the same application or the same instance. And I think that once we get to that part of where the optionality of providers and experiences is so great that that optionality itself becomes more appealing than going with like one particular provider, then the aggregator model has come out on top, and that you've seen that. But I think the challenge to get there, to scale to that level, and to do so really city by city, not platform by platform, but city by city, that's a long road to climb, which is why it's so important to keep an eye on these early L4 deployments that are happening in brand new markets that don't have deployments there before. Between what Vern, Pony AI, and Uber announced in Croatia, very recently, right? Each of one of these new frontier conquests, right? Monitoring how we perform there is really important. Granted, I think the definition of a commercial deployment is very different there than it might be in a market, here where there's true driver out. But I think monitoring the early progress of those new markets with new providers is key to unlocking whether that's going to survive in the long term. But in the meanwhile, I think, I think there's this pattern of where the news that I get to read, on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, coming from Waymo, it's increasingly statistically driven. It's increasingly data points. It's increasingly, here's the scoreboard, basically, right? It's an interesting dynamic on how announcements from both sides of the camp are shaping up.
And it's not talked a lot about, and I'll start with you here, then we'll go to you on this, Chris. Yeah. There was a public press release that Waymo put out that you would explore doing a personally owned vehicle with Toyota. I think it was 2 sentences or 3 sentences. So it's out there. Is that the next frontier, Hugh? Is it personally owned? And what happens if and when Waymo pulls back the curtain and says, "Yeah, we're doing a personally owned AV. Here it is." How does the market react if and when that does occur?
I think you have a lot of OEs with heavy investment in potential Robotaxi platforms or desire to pivot to co-manufacturing arrangements. To do that, you have a lot of OEs in the room that are probably wondering the same thing. Because I think, for the most part, if you're an OE who's had to decide whether to roll back your investments in L4 for the benefit of investing in your L2 plus ADAS capability in your cars, you want to know the answer to that question. I think there's an underlying question, which is, how vital is just base L2 plus ADAS in vehicle that people buy going to be? Is it truly the critical gating feature that I think the likes of Tesla have a narrative for? I think that question has to be answered first. As for what happens when a leader in the kind of the rideshare model decides to effectively license that technology and put it in the hands of another OE to be able to put mass market, my question becomes, how would you price that, right? And I think that the first leader to market that can actually do that, acknowledging that there have been other companies, other startups that have gone to market with a message that they're creating a personally owned, L4 vehicle. The one with the best brand recognition and the largest OE partner with the most proven hardware and the proven experience, that'll be the OEM that wins. And I haven't seen a commercial model in history, right, that sort of parallels what would happen if all of a sudden you had your own version of the Waymo service. I haven't seen that before.
Well, let's call spade a spade. Waymo is a verb, and it's only getting stronger as a verb. Chris, if and when, I'll hedge there, I'll put legal language on there, if and when Waymo does decide to follow through and do personally owned, how would that change from a safety perspective? Would it be similar to what we see in the public rollouts today? It'd be a limited service area where you could engage, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I think it's a good question as to what personal car ownership would look like. And I guess maybe the way I'd frame this is just to ask everyone to think a little bit about what would be required, right? Is it really that I build this software and I deploy it and maybe give it the occasional update? Or is this something that really needs to kind of be part of the same ecosystem that's been built out for ride hailing, at which point you can kind of understand why a company coming from that perspective could offer something, compelling in that area. I think, I do hear people talk about, I can get my own personally owned vehicle and then it can go out and take rides, and then I can use it, so basically while I'm at work, it can go out and earn money. I will say, after serving on an on-call rotation and seeing all the things that can happen to a car, maybe, if I had to rely on it to pick me up in the morning, I don't know if somebody rear-ended it that night, or if basically, somebody, had some form of accident in the back seat or something after drinking too much. All these things are possibilities which, you can sort of look at in a car that's being put into the transportation service, and you have a reliable partner who can keep these things clean and monitor, but you really don't want that in your driveway in the morning. So if I were going to buy an automated vehicle and send it out as part of a ride hailing, that would probably not be my daily vehicle.
That would have to be your second vehicle if you can make the economics work, because before it comes back to your house, you better hope and pray it's going to go to Hugh's Depot to get inspected.
And that's when we start to talk about it. It's like, if I'm going to actually do that, what does a personally owned car with automated capabilities look like?
But I think from a mass market perspective, if we think about some of the promises that mass autonomy will unlock for society, one that I look forward to is not really ever having to worry about owning my own parking spot anymore. Parking lots going away, road infrastructure being refined. And when you think about the dynamics of owning a vehicle personally, whether that vehicle is driving you around half the time and then driving would-be partiers around the other half of the time, it's still coming back to potentially a place that you have to rent or own to house it, right? Perhaps there's a model for depots opening up, kind of like barns for a horse, right? Perhaps there's a model opening up where, your personally owned AV can go and sit at a stable and be cleaned and groomed and have the French fries removed from the back seat, as well. Perhaps that becomes a viable, model, but I think time will tell. I also think right now, and I'm going to go ahead and just ask for you, Chris, I'm sure if we asked for a show of hands on who's actually experienced either a Waymo ride or like a Baidu Apollo ride before, maybe a show of hands would be nice. I would guess it's a good chunk of the audience, not necessarily an audience from the West Coast, right? But that experience is still, as it's been described to me by my friends who come into town and try it, it's a premium experience.
Yep.
Right. And can that experience truly still be, maybe it's even more premium if you control it yourself, right? But when you put it out into the world and have it do its own thing, you lose that edge. And so it sort of suggests that you can't commoditize the L4 experience too much. Otherwise, that model of owning it personally won't make any sense at all.
There's a lot to be said for the experience. So I worked on automated vehicles since '92, and I have to say that the day that a Waymo actually showed up outside my door to give my wife and I a ride on date night, that was a game changer. It's like, I knew this technology. I've spent I don't know how many hours, one hand hovering over the big red button in the research lab out on the test track. But man, when that thing showed up right in my driveway, and we got in. There's no driver. You just close the doors. Date night begins. That was fantastic. And so we're at a time right now where, for instance, in the San Francisco Bay Area, I mean, people are to some extent just kind of over it, right? I mean, there's Waymos driving around all the time. It's a choice that you make for transportation. You do occasionally hear people say, maybe I don't need another car, because I can rely on this. You have other places where it still seems like science fiction. It's like, really? There are cars that drive themselves? And then you have kind of everywhere in between. So I was in Miami a few weeks ago, and people are, pulling out their camera when I'm in the Waymo and taking pictures, or kind of, jumping in front of it. Is it going to stop? What's it going to do? And I mean, that is, that doesn't happen in the Bay Area. It happened in the Bay Area a few years ago. It doesn't happen anymore. And so that entire spectrum is really interesting from the standpoint of communicating to the public, or from the standpoint of communicating to regulators. You have regulators who've been working on this for a while, and others who are just trying to ramp up and be like, wait a minute, what does this car do? What am I supposed to be, doing to check safety on it? Really across the spectrum. So kind of back to that William Gibson quote about the future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
The new market reactions are awesome. I'm an early rider in a lot of your programs, and Miami, some of the interesting conversations I've had at red lights have been interesting. Dallas is another interesting early rider in the Dallas market. Those conversations, it's to the individuals that aren't exposed, you're like, wow. And then this one individual in Dallas said, is there a F blank ghost in driving the car? I said, no, it's not one of those piano cars. It's a car that does good stuff. But it's fun to have those early conversations, because it takes us back to the old days when we were having all these early conversations. We have a really good question here, and I'm going to caveat and add on to this question. It's about snow. You've tested for years in Kentucky, up in Tahoe. You've tested in Buffalo for years. And the question is, you have a rollout in Minneapolis. How do you prepare for snowy conditions? But you also have Denver on the roadmap. You have Detroit on the roadmap. There's snow. How do you prepare for these snowy conditions? Because going way back when, we're like, okay, it's got to be perfect weather. And now the Waymo driver's like, yeah, rain, fog, no problem. Yeah, now we're going to snow.
Yeah, well, I mean, when we got to I had the question about, how do you choose locations? Originally, a lot of the locations were chosen because of sunny weather and the fact that they didn't get snow. So that was an earlier place to deploy. Obviously, cities that we've announced have snowfall, and that has been part of the development plan, to be able to have the confidence of the Waymo driver operating on snow. So that's been something that has been in development and testing for a while. And so, as we roll out in these new geos, we will have these capabilities.
When let's just use Denver as an example, because I believe you did a blog post, or might have been an X post on this, when you talked about the cleaning of the sensors. Is that stuff that you learned from winter testing, or did you build something magical at the castle that you came up with that idea?
I don't know what the origin of the sensor cleaning, other than just the fact that when you actually have to deploy this in a service, you learn a lot of these little details. I mean, there are honestly days when I look at everything and think maybe getting the car to drive itself was the easy part here, because you do have to make sure that it continues to operate in a variety of conditions. You see all sorts of human behavior when you're out on the roadway. People who love the cars, people who want to take advantage of the safety in some ways. When you open up a transportation service and want to make it available to everyone, which is actually a big part of having the large geographic areas, so that you are providing mobility to people who may not have as many options, you are basically getting an entire cross-section of humanity trying to make the vehicle as accessible as possible. And so,
I have to say, I'm amazed at, outside of the well-publicized incidents, how well individuals have been behaving in your vehicles. It's been truly amazing. So hopefully that continues. I'm curious, Hugh, when you're deploying a AV service, let's use Waymo, for example, in a snowy condition, how does that change the partnership requirements? Because I grew up in the Northeast, there's a thing called salt on the road, and that starts to eat away at things. Yeah. Do you have to account for that? Are there other things in these different environments?
Absolutely. I think you have to, particularly if you're relying on a partner for anything involving the servicing, maintenance, cleaning, refueling, or charging, and or like deprovisioning or decommissioning of a vehicle. You definitely have to, because all of those factors, whether it's dust storms in Phoenix, or it's salt and snow, or just a lot of precipitation or humidity, all require different manual ways of dealing with that. And, unless you're prescriptive about the standard operating procedure that your partner has to follow in order to make the vehicle habitable, deployable, and utilizable despite that, you can't expect that your partner's just going to figure out on its own. But I think that's also where, for the process of market deployment, there tends to be gates. There's a validation gate, there's a testing gate. And during that gate is where I understand robotaxi operators have the opportunity to experience all of the unique, even weather-related issues and impacts to a vehicle testing at scale might be. It's important to figure that out first and up front before you put enough vehicles in an ODD that you start to actually encounter that vehicle at that issue at scale. I also think one inherent advantage of the multimodal, multi-sensory approach to vehicle autonomy beyond camera-based, not to get too spicy, but I'm going to get there.
Oh, come on.
The ability,
keep going.
It's the ability to gather a number of different weather data points, right? And to gather and to store and to gather and to make sense of different weather points and the impacts of the weather, not just to vehicle performance, but also to surrounding infrastructure, the negotiation between passenger and vehicle in behavior, right? That's an inherent advantage, I believe, of that approach, which requires higher capital and the infrastructure behind it to gather that data, but ultimately should, in my view, result in much richer data to make the ultimate driving and inclement weather capability, even safer. I also think vehicle dynamics play a big part into that. We're talking to SAE and the different kinds of hardware, right, that might be deployed into that environment. Different kinds of cars plays a big factor in whether you can operate safely in that market.
And I would say one, just to follow up on that, you're absolutely right. Getting the data, we've also recently published some of the information about our Waymo world model. And the idea that a lot of this data that's being gathered then allows AI to generate virtual scenarios, which can add inclement weather to a lot of scenarios, a lot of different geos. So we can study these things in simulation as well.
And your parent company has the incredible data set, WeatherNext 2, that I've played with. So really good data that Google Cloud has there. We haven't brought it up, and I got to bring it up. And I experienced it a few weeks ago, Highway. That was a magical experience when I took the Waymo from SFO, even though I had to go to the Kiss and Fly Center. That aside, it was a wonderful experience. And when I was going down the 101 towards Mountain View, an individual in the left-hand lane driving like a bat out of you-know-where land cuts us off, and the Waymo went honk honk, and I was like, "This is not. I never experienced this. What caused the Waymo to go honk honk going down the 101?"
So the honking is often used to alert the other road user if they're doing something, and kind of the Waymo wants to make the other vehicle aware of its presence, in terms of cutting over like that. So it is a signal, in particular in lower speed situations as well. You may actually get the person to jam on the brakes. In the freeway situation, the person is at least aware of the Waymo as they're driving quickly and changing lanes, and so that's part of the rationale behind that. It is, when you start to think about what you learn from data and how you have to model other road users, freeways are interesting in terms of exactly how fast other road users may be driving when you encounter them.
So you can track the speed of the honk honkers, the guys that are going fast?
Yeah, we're able to look at the vehicles and basically determine their position and speed. We use that in behavior predictions.
Okay. Wow. I'm glad to know that, because when that happened to me like a couple of weeks ago on my SFO ride, I thought the car was just developing personality. And I thought this was on the heels of like the April Fool's joke, right? That they played out in the vehicle. So I thought it was just sass, but good to know that there's actual logic behind it.
This is the issue when you develop autonomous vehicles, right? There's actually reasons for the honking.
Yeah. So the other thing I noticed when the highway, we went on all three lanes. We didn't go in the issue. We went over all three lanes, and it was very aware of its situational awareness. It was aware of trucks. It was aware of speeders behind us. it was aware of, and I'm assuming that it sensed the vehicles that wanted to go past us, and it would move over. How do you prepare for that from a safety perspective? And I'll say this very bluntly: I felt much safer in your vehicle on the 101 than I did in a human-driven ride share, where I said to myself, "Never going to do it again," because there was such a level of comfort and safety that I felt like your vehicle had. How did you engineer that from a safety perspective?
That's a good question. It comes back to these 12 different methodologies that we're using. So when we make the determination that the system is ready to deploy, we've looked at it through a wide variety of lenses. And so we've generated a lot of metrics on simulation data. We've looked at a lot of real world testing data. And we've looked at the response of the vehicle to try to determine that. So as you might imagine, as we've discussed, the vehicle really operates in a hybrid model where we're using machine learning for a lot of things. There's also some rules that the vehicle has to reflect as well. So it really is a hybrid system. And that requires a really large degree of testing and simulation and looking at it from a variety of different perspectives. So, as a result of all of that, then we develop a driver that is going to be proactive in many ways, that is going to be looking at where are the potential safety concerns and choosing not only its route, but its actions accordingly.
That's how you have to. This has been a fascinating conversation. I have to ask each of you the $1 million question as we wrap. What's next? Hugh, what's next for the Robotaxi ecosystem? And Chris, for you, what's next for Waymo? So we'll start with Hugh.
I'm going to give a boring corporate answer.
Oh, that's not nice.
That's the brand, right? But we mentioned earlier their proliferation of partners in the AV ecosystem. There will be a new entrant, the fleet financer, and that will unlock a significant degree of capital and risk management that I think to date is serving to inhibit mass robotaxi deployment, real institutional dollars backing the purchase, the leasing, and the maintenance, and the securitization maybe even, right, of robotaxis. I think that's one big potential unlock, to the ecosystem. But I also think that, like we saw with the situation on the freeways of Wuhan, just a few weeks ago, and for those, there was an incident involving one particular L4 provider and the outages that they experienced there and the issues that resulted from that. I think I'm girding myself for more kind of miniature step backs before we see major progress forward. And I think that we're in the long game of L4 specific scaling. Emotionally, that's what I think I'm ready for and what I think is going to be coming. So maybe just a couple different perspectives than the obvious of it should scale. But yeah.
I'll follow on before we give it to Chris here. Capital's flowing. Waymo is taking outside capital, the second or third round of outside capital. It is going to flow into, if you want to say, the AV REIT model, real estate investment trust. You're going to see some bundling of the vehicle assets and the infrastructure assets along with energy, and it will be securitized. There is a big fund working on that, so well done on that. And Chris, what's next for Waymo?
I mean, I've been at Waymo for a year, and during that period of time, there's been an inflection point. There's been a real change from we can do this to we must do this, right? And I think when we're talking about, the numbers are almost numbing. I think, when you sort of talk about it, it's like, oh, we've got a 92% reduction in serious injury or worse crashes. And I'm like, oh, that sounds pretty good. But it's like, wait, that's an order of magnitude better than a human being. Think of what we could do to safety on the roadway if this is deployed at scale. I mean, it is a mind-blowing proposition for what this technology could do. And I think within the company, you really see that sense of, yes, we're moving to a lot of different geographic areas. We can build out a solid ride-hail business. But from a public health standpoint, is there anything that we could do that would have similar impact? And so I think that's really important is for the company to scale, to be able to put this technology out on the roads, to actually start to make an impact in the fatalities that we see. We're not at the point of being able to make statistically significant statements about fatalities alone, which is why we say serious injuries and fatalities and look at that combined class. But we're not necessarily that far away from it. And I think that really is a mission orientation, and it's something that we're dedicated to putting this out in more people's hands, making a larger impact, and hopefully communicating that to regulators and safety advocates so they see that this is a potential that really can dwarf many other safety technologies that we've seen in the past.
We're just getting ready. Robotaxis are scaling. Chris, Hugh, thank you so much.
Grayson.
Thanks, Grayson.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today. If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we dig into a new technology designed to reduce motion sickness in cars before it even starts.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.